It's time now for the award-winning #1 local talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, The Sam Lesante Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lesante.
So my friends, what do we know about Act 47? It's started in Hazleton 2018. A lot is involved, but I wonder how much do we really know about Act 47? Today I hope to give you a complete education of what the city of Hazleton is facing on Act 47. We have two people who will thoroughly give you an explanation. I have Gerald Cross, who is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Economy League, and the Communications Director, Lynne Shedlock. As we were discussing, Jerry and Lynn, Act 47, which started in 2018 in the city of Hazleton, probably in the city of Hazleton, I would assume 90% of the people don't really understand the full concept of Act 47. I didn't, okay? So today I'm hoping we could explain exactly what Act 47 is, the effects of Act 47, and how does it affect the individual people in the city of Hazleton. So what is Act 47, Jerry?
Simply, Act 47 is the nickname, because it's the number of the act, of the law called the Municipalities Financial Recovery Act. It was established by the state legislature in 1986 in response to the collapse of the steel industry in the Monongahela Valley, southwestern PA. Yes. That trouble, that fiscal distress, is prevalent throughout Pennsylvania. So as time went by, more and more towns met the qualifications, the criteria to be declared distressed under what we call Act 47. And that distress designation is levied by the state. It's upon application by the municipality or other people. And there's a whole process you go through to become distressed. And when you are declared distressed, then there's a legal procedure you follow, spelled out under the Municipalities Financial Recovery Act.
So they applied in 2017.
Yes.
And then it was started in 2018.
There's a process where you apply to the state. The state does an evaluation, independent evaluation by their own employees. They have a public hearing. They take testimony, and then there is a determination made by the Secretary of the Department of Community and Economic Development, who's in charge of the local governments in Pennsylvania.
And how did Hazleton get into the Act of 47?
Hazleton had a severe cash problem. They had a shortfall. They had several years of increasing deficits to the point where it was necessary to ask the Commonwealth for an $800,000 loan to pay past due bills and to maintain cash flow, to maintain payroll. The Act is specific. In the Act, there's language saying the Act will require payment of payroll, payment of past due obligations, and payment of vendors to maintain vital and necessary services to the citizens. So it's really an act to preserve the services of government. So in times of fiscal distress, the citizens don't have a loss of services or a threat to safety.
And here again, this is the critical part that I think most people they know of the Act, but not details of how this affects their lives, okay? What if Hazleton would have applied for Act 47?
Well, they would have had a cash problem. They would have had, what would have happened, a continuation of the trends they were experiencing. They did not have enough revenue on a year-to-year basis to pay for ongoing expenses necessary to provide vital and necessary services for the city. So that trend would have continued. It took an $800,000 loan from the state at no interest to balance those books for that short time. Then it took the city council and mayor raising taxes in 2018 to provide further revenue. It was an ongoing steps.
So okay, so PEL, which is Pennsylvania Economy League, what is your role there? What is basically the Pennsylvania Economy League's role in this particular Act 47?
Our official title is we are the coordinator under Act 47. When the state declared the city distress, they put out a request for firms like ours. We're a nonprofit organization. We do this work in Pennsylvania, to give a proposal to the state to work for the state under a state contract on behalf of the city of Hazleton to prepare a recovery plan. In the Act, we prepared the recovery plan. We had to be independent. We conducted our own investigation. We had our own experts come in to evaluate different situations within the city, and we had to draft a plan of recovery, a fiscal recovery largely. And then we had to explain that to the city and have the approval of the city council and the mayor for that plan. So our role then becomes we help implement the plan, because the ordinance that the city council passed was the recovery plan.
Okay.
Essentially, it's a plan that the city agrees to abide by and follow.
And Lynn, this is nonpartisan, right? I mean, this
Correct.
is not a Democrat, Republican. So the function is what?
We are a complete nonpartisan organization. So when we go into a situation like this, we are basically looking at numbers, we are looking at operations, we are looking at best practices, we are relying on our knowledge of technical assistance that we give to governments throughout the state. And I would also like to throw in there that I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Act 47 is that when we come in, that we are somehow taking over
Yes.
the government.
Yeah.
We are not taking over the government. We come in, we provide a plan. The plan then must be approved by the municipality, and it is up to the municipality to implement it. It is strictly their plan. It is not something that we are taking over the town.
That's why we're called coordinators and not overseers.
Okay.
Or receivers in the sense of a business bankruptcy or, in extreme cases, receivership instituted by the state.
So going back, before the city is able to apply for Act 47, there is a preliminary review of the city and the finances. Am I correct, Lynn?
Well, there's several criteria that have to be examined. The law is very specific. It lists, I think it lists 7 or 8 criteria that if any one of those criteria are met, the city or municipality could be declared distress.
Okay.
And Hazleton met it for increasing deficits and inability to maintain current expenses, I believe.
And the state will come in, it's the state's report. So the state will come in and examine the situation and determine if any of those criteria that Jerry mentioned are met, and then presents that report to the secretary, and then it's up to the secretary to make the final determination.
So the point is, what did you discover, which is public information, just to give me what did you discover when you came in and started looking at the city of Hazleton? What were some of the key?
Well, the key findings was the city had a continuing pattern of budget deficits.
Okay, how many years was that go? How many years you go back?
It's in the plan. We have to go back 5 years by law. We have to look at 5 years
Okay, so if they
prior.
applied in 2017, you'd go back to 212.
Yeah, the plan covers from 2012, 2013 through
Okay,
2017.
okay. So going back to 2012, you did looking at it
Right.
at that. Okay.
Remember, the plan has to put down a scenario where, in the absence of going to Act 47 or using the plan's implementation, what will happen? And it was clear the prior 5-year trends, if they were continued into the future with cost increases and flat revenue, the city would have increasing deficits, which would put provision of vital and necessary services at risk. The city wouldn't have to cut services dramatically because of the size of their deficits over the next 5 years.
Okay.
And, well, I wanted to mention that we view those projections as the ghosts of Christmas future. So, as Jerry said, we put those together not assuming any loans, any tax increases, anything like that. It's very much status quo, very much a conservative approach to certain things. This is what's could happen if you don't take any action.
Okay, so let me go back in history a little bit, okay? Just so we're looking at government, we're looking at, how it affects our lives, et cetera, because when you're talking services, when you start cutting the police department, start cutting fire, well, all of a sudden, crime begins to increase. Thank God we are reduced in crime over the years, which we've been very fortunate. Okay, so if City Council would have followed the 2011 plan and continued it, would the city have ever had to file for Act 47?
Well, the 2011 plan was different than an Act 47 plan.
Yes.
That was something called an early intervention plan. It was funded by the local bank that put into The city had had a cash flow crisis in 2011, and they were refinancing, I believe, their tax anticipation notes. As a prerequisite to getting that loan, the bank asked that the city undergo what's called an early intervention program report. That's a report, essentially, it's a precursor to Act 47. It lays out what will happen if these trends continue. And in that report, there was a similar finding. Once the borrowed money washes its way through the system, once you have that deficit reoccur, because deficits are eliminated when you borrow money, just like if you raise taxes. The problem is you got to pay the money back on borrowing. So once those deficits reoccur, then the city will have a cash problem. The trouble with deficits are they are subtle. So when you don't follow the plan, and that was pointed out in 2011 that there was going to be deficits, and I believe we called for tax increases. Well, there was a tax increase, and that helped, but there was consecutive or consequent tax increases later or expenditure reductions. A deficit starts to eat away at your cash. So you don't have money in December. Well, you don't pay your bills. You don't have money in November. Well, you don't pay those bills and you're not paying December bills. Eventually, you run out of money so early in the year that payroll's at risk. And that's what was happening, and that's the trend we saw in 2011. It came to fruition in 2016 and 17 when the city really did run out of money earlier and earlier, engendering the $800,000 loan that was needed.
What is the goal of the recovery plan?
Oh, it's simple. It's to eliminate deficits and to provide adequate resources or expenditure changes to maintain payroll, the payment of payroll for employees, that's critical, the payment of debts that the city has incurred in the past, so that's critical, and maintaining vital and necessary services. The Act uses that language, vital and necessary services, and each town can decide which they are. In Hazleton, someone would argue that it's public works, police, and fire.
All right. So before I go to break, am I under the understanding that council and the mayor voted to approve Act 47?
Yes.
Okay.
You have to.
Okay. My friends, I'm talking to Gerald Cross, who is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Economy League, and Lynne Shedlock, who is the communications director of the Pennsylvania Economy League, talking about Act 47. Interesting, because you're going to find out what are the components, what are the recoveries, and well, after City Council and the mayor approved this, how do we live by it, and what happens? We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show, folks. Remember, 24/7, you can watch all of our original programming. 21 or 22 shows we produce, original programming. In Pottsville, Comcast 190 from 7 to 11 p.m. Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Kingston on Service Electric Communications Channel 92 from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Saturdays and Sundays, and of course in the Lackawanna County on Comcast 190 Saturdays and Sunday mornings 8 to 11. Download the app, search SSP TV, and you'll find out a lot of information. Speaking of information, Act 47 was initiated here in 2018 in Hazleton, and it affects our lives. It affects our lives. So we're talking to Gerald Cross, who is the executive director, and Lynne Shedlock, who is the communications director, explaining some of these things of 847. Remember, folks, for those of you who live in Hazleton, it is affecting your lives. All right, they voted for Act 47. What are the components of this recovery plan?
The recovery plan it has projections for 5 years forward and has what we call initiatives that are designed to eliminate the deficits that were projected under the baseline. So the initiatives involve changing of the tax structure, and that was accomplished last year by a petition to county court. What we did was we suggested, and of course when the plan was adopted it became the goal of the city, we implemented an increase in the local earned income tax. So there was an increase on residents' wages.
This was your recommendation?
It was our recommendation. Okay. It's one of the most effective tools that Act 47 gives you, because increasing property taxes, which is one way to eliminate deficits, is problematic. You share that tax base with the county, the school district, and the city. And people fixate on the local elected officials, typically city or borough, and really don't understand that the higher part of that millage is really school district. So it's understandable when someone in public office says, I will not raise your taxes. But what they're really saying is, I won't raise your real estate tax. Because that hits across every property owner, largely senior citizens to a big proportion.
Yes.
It misses, to some extent, renters, depending on how
Big time.
depending on how the landlord treats the increase. It is suspected to come to encourage blight, because as the cost of ownership becomes more expensive, it does cause some lack of maintenance. It's a large tax on home ownership. Income tax, however, hits you on your wages. And wages are variable, and they come out of your paycheck. And it is a bit easier. We're all used to the federal income tax. We're all used to the deductions. What we had suggested was that the current tax rate of the city be increased. And it was increased, pardon me for not remembering the percentage, but it was increased by county court order. The city already had a pension earned income tax, so there was already a greater than 1% tax. We increased it, I want to say, by 0.4 or 0.6, and I apologize for not having the numbers in my head. But that essentially gave the city more cash flow.
So it was your recommendation for that particular.
Yes.
Okay. So it wasn't council or the mayor who increased it. It was a recommendation from.
Because it was seen as the quickest way to satisfy the deficit elimination.
So that's why I want people to understand. Okay. So after 1 year, has the city made progress, and is the future looking brighter?
Oh, absolutely. The progress can be measured in the daily. We have weekly cash reports from the city. And the city has sufficient cash. We do cash flow management for them. The city has sufficient cash to get through the year. They have sufficient cash to pay their bills. Now, when I say sufficient, that doesn't mean they have unlimited. There will be, over the course of the recovery plan, necessity to raise certain taxes or cut expenses. The plan anticipates that.
Unless additional revenue comes into the city. Okay.
Yeah, the plan anticipates that.
Okay. So if there's creativity, correct me if I'm wrong, to whereas the city can create additional income, this won't affect taxpayers because we're getting the money somewhere.
Well, that's always beneficial, because at the end of the day, you go back to the taxpayers, right?
What's the minimum amount of time that the city must remain on Act 47?
There really is no minimum amount of time. There's actually a maximum.
Okay.
The law was changed in 2014 to require, after 5 years, there has to be an evaluation of the city's financial condition. The coordinator does that evaluation. And that is given to the state. The same people that said you're in 47 then have to decide if you can get out.
Okay.
And if you haven't solved, the plan is written for a 5-year window.
Okay.
At the end of that 5 years, if it's not making progress, the state gives them another up to 3 more years, but that 3 years is designed to do certain actions that must be taken. So you really want to get it done in 5 years.
If someone is saying that they will cut taxes or not increase taxes this year, what would happen?
Yeah, you have to understand that Act 47's plan has projections in there for revenue and expenses.
Yes.
It's a living document. As the city adopts budgets, as the city does changes to its operation and realizes revenue, you can't realistically say, I will not do something, because the city operates on a year-to-year budget. As we get closer to budget time and our projections help the city understand its current fiscal position, then you can say you may need to raise taxes.
Okay.
You may not, but you can't blanket, and it's not fair to the taxpayer, and it wouldn't be fair to the spirit of the plan to say we're not going to do something. You have to be able to provide necessary revenue to provide necessary services.
Okay, so let's go to each department. I understand that each department now has reasonable spending limitations. Is that correct?
That's required by the Act.
All right. Can the city hire more people, or can the unions be giving raises?
There is flexibility in the Act 47 plan, because the Commonwealth does not want, as Lynn mentioned before, the Commonwealth is not taking over the city. The Commonwealth is providing the expertise to make a plan. In the Act 47 law, it is required that each department have expenditure limits. So there is a dollar amount for each department, police, each unionized department, and the non-unionized department.
It stays at that particular.
And it is projected out over 5 years. Within that total, so let's say, for example, one department has $4 million to spend during the year. The department can spend, and the council and the mayor can budget, up to $4 million. Now, how they budget that if they need to increase employment,
gotcha.
if they need to pay
Right.
increased health care, how they budget that money.
That's where the fiscal management.
That's as long as you don't
Right.
exceed the
Okay.
cap. So you cannot hire more people to exceed that cap. You can't give more benefits
Unless
to
you
exceed
get
that
revenue
cap.
coming in.
Unless you get enough
Revenue.
revenue that the plan did not anticipate,
Yeah.
so we could amend the plan.
Okay. Now,
And I would add that one of the reasons for that cap is to accommodate collective bargaining, because there was an issue with another Act 47 city concerning collective bargaining. And so this was the resolution, so that the unions still can engage in that collective bargaining practice and the municipality can be in Act 47.
It's still good faith. The city and the union decide how to allocate that money, but there is a limit on what you can spend per department.
okay. With the pace the city is on now, okay, you said you're getting reports. Do you expect the city to come out of Act 47 in a reasonable time frame and be solid and to be in good financial shape?
I think the city is operationally solvent now. I think the city has a little bit of a way, some ways to go yet, but the plan was written so that at the end of the 5th year, the city is out of Act 47.
Okay. Folks, I'm talking with Gerald Cross, who is the executive director of the Pennsylvania League, and Lynne Shedlock, who is the communications director. There you have it. We're going to come back to wrap up a few things about the recommendations, etc. And now the city, from what I understand, is on the way to recovery.
Absolutely.
Okay,
It's part of the-
we'll be back right after this. Thanks for staying with us, folks. We're talking about Act 47 in Hazleton was started 2018, and it's to make the city recovery, and we're doing extremely well, according to what Gerald Cross just said, who is the executive director, Lynne Shedlock, who is the communication director. All right, we have Hazleton, and we have other third-class citizens. How does Hazleton compare?
We did a statewide report in 2017 that looked at 2,300 municipalities across the state, including all of the third-class cities. And basically what we found on our index, we have a 1 to 5 index. 5 would be the less healthy end. What we found is that every third-class city except for 3 or 4 was at that 5 least healthy level. There's a lot of reasons for that. You know, what happened with cities is they saw an exodus of their population to a large extent, and when people leave, they take their tax money with them. But as Jerry is fond of saying, they don't take the roads, they don't take that infrastructure. So with the cities now have less of a tax base and less resources to deal with.
Hence, goes back to why a city has to stay healthy, so we can keep the people here, okay, and the revenue, because you're right, Jerry. They don't take the roads. People still want to be protected, okay? So now, in Hazleton, like any city, some people are saying that they shouldn't follow this plan. What happens if the city doesn't, and will the city eventually go into receivership if they don't follow the plan?
It's not realistic to say don't follow the plan, because the plan is a law of the city. That's like saying let's not follow the city ordinance.
Unfortunately,
I know people misunderstand.
Yeah,
it.
well,
They-
yeah, people who, you know, whether there's a political agenda, whatever.
Yeah,
we're talking facts here, and it's nonpartisan. I want people to understand the true facts.
We're used to that in every city or borough that we
Yeah.
work in Act 47. There's always that group of people who say we shouldn't follow the plan, as if there was an alternative to having to borrow $800,000 from the state.
Yeah.
The argument that you need to follow it is covered by the law. The Act anticipates that if you don't follow the Act, if you don't follow the plan put before you, it's a legally adopted ordinance. If for some reason the city decides to dig in their heels and not follow it, the law prescribes a withholding of state aid. Your liquid fuels money, your grants, they're withheld. If that doesn't work, and the city it becomes unable to provide public safety, health, vital and necessary services, a case can be made for a receiver to be appointed. That happened in Harrisburg. It hasn't happened anywhere else. There was a receiver appointed with very, very strong powers, much greater than the coordinator, who effectively will implement the plan.
The good news is the plan is working. The city is doing well. Is that correct?
Absolutely. No need for a receivership here.
Folks, hope you learned something about Act 47. It's critical for those of us. I have a property here in Hazleton. We invested. Downtown is growing. You have homes, you have real estate, and you want things to be run the right way. These are facts. It's nonpartisan, folks. It's nonpartisan. I want to thank Gerald Cross, and I want to thank you, Lynne, for coming on the show for the information. I learned something today. We'll see you next time.